The Mecklenburg County election debates are a service of WTVI, Mecklenburg County, and the League of Women Voters of Charlotte-Mecklenburg. The views and opinions expressed in these debates are those of the candidates and do not necessarily represent the views of WTVI, its management, Mecklenburg County, or the League of Women Voters.
PBS Charlotte and the League of Women Voters present Election Debate 2016.
Hello, I'm Jeff Rivenbark with PBS Charlotte. Welcome to the North Carolina House District 100 race primary debate sponsored by PBS Charlotte and the League of Women Voters Charlotte-Mecklenburg. In the next 20 minutes, we'll talk with the two Democratic candidates running in the North Carolina House District 100 race. Now, the questions for our debate were prepared by the League of Women Voters of Charlotte-Mecklenburg. The candidates were not given the questions in advance. I will call on the candidates in random order to answer questions. They will have between 30 seconds and 1 minute to answer each question, and I'll tell the candidates in advance how long they have to respond. If you would like to challenge your opponent, you may raise your yellow challenge card. You will have 30 seconds to respond. Each candidate has 3 challenges during this debate. There are no opening statements, but each candidate will have the opportunity to make a 30-second closing statement. And now, let's meet the two Democratic candidates for North Carolina House District 100. The candidates are John Autry and Billy Madelon. Gentlemen, very glad to have you with us today. Our first question, we will begin with John Autry. You were just reelected to the City Council. Why are you seeking this House seat at this time? A 30-second response.
Thank you. I was fortunate enough to be reelected to my 3rd term on Charlotte City Council. And when the opportunity presented itself that the seat was going to be open for this election cycle, I had to take the opportunity to get into the race. I wonder if there's enough experience in the General Assembly with those who have actually served in municipal governance. I think it's important to have that voice in the legislature because a lot of the actions that we've seen over the legislature after the last 3 or 4 years seem to be not in the best interests of cities and counties. So I want to take that voice of experience and the knowledge that I've gained of serving on City Council to the General Assembly to help with that work.
All right, Mr. Autry, thank you. Mr. Madelon, a 30-second response. Tell us why you are running for NC House District 100.
Well, this is a unique opportunity for me and for the communities that I have worked in for the last 25 years. I have civic experience and a great deal of personal experience. I'm a small business person, and I'm also a member of the LGBT community, and I think it's the perfect district for someone like me to go to Raleigh. The day that I walk into the doors of that chamber, it will be changed forever. I don't think there's ever been an out LGBT person that's married with children in the North Carolina legislature that can bring a voice to a part of our community that is currently voiceless in our North Carolina General Assembly, not to mention the small business community. And so I look forward to the opportunity.
All right, thank you. The next question, also a 30-second response, and we'll send this to both of our candidates. Why do you think you are more qualified than your opponent? Mr. Autry, we begin with you.
Thank you for that question. I think there again, as I mentioned earlier about experience on the municipality level of serving in local government, bringing that voice to the General Assembly is very important. I've also been a community and neighborhood activist for 25 years in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg area. I have served the citizens of Southeast Charlotte well over 10 years in public service as an elected official. And I want to continue to help cities and municipalities, especially urban centers, grow and thrive. North Carolina is a growing community at large, but in Charlotte, we're going to be growing even bigger and stronger.
All right, thank you. Mr. Madelon, your response.
Well, in the North Carolina General Assembly, item number 1 and number 2 needs to be job creation and education. I am a small business person. I've owned a small business for more than 20 years. I've made more than 500 payrolls, and I understand the challenges that are associated with job creation for small businesses. And that's where the future jobs in North Carolina are going to come from. I also have had 17 foster children over the years, all of whom have been in the CMS school system, and so I understand the differences between schools that are challenged and schools that are not, and I understand the need to fully fund our education system in North Carolina.
All right, thank you again. We're looking for a 30-second response. We'll take this back to Mr. Madelon. How can a minority party representative such as yourself influence a supermajority-controlled legislature?
Well, it's always about relationships when it comes to politics. It's about finding common ground, about finding a voice that you can share with people on the other side of the aisle. It's not a team sport. Politics is full of narcissistic, sycophantic people who believe that it's all about them. In fact, it's about the people of North Carolina, and there are people at the North Carolina General Assembly who understand that and believe it, as I do, who will be more than happy to sit down and talk about common ground and where we can find commonality to solve the problems for the people of our state.
All right, Mr. Madeline, thank you. How can a minority party representative such as yourself influence a supermajority-controlled legislature? Mr. Autry.
Well, thank you. I certainly understand the challenges of being in the minority in the General Assembly in this day and age. But that minority is not going to always be that way. I think it's important to get there, to be a participant, to build relationships, to establish trust with members of the other side, so that when the time comes that you want to push forward on an issue that's going to help your citizens of North Carolina, then is the time to leverage that relationship, that understanding, that trust that you're going to build with other members. And that means of being a participant there all the time, all day long.
All right, thank you. We're going to go back to Mr. Autry for the next question, also looking for a 30-second response. How can the Mecklenburg delegation work together to more effectively represent the county?
I think the Mecklenburg delegation right now is working very well together. We have certainly seen our challenges and presented them out for everyone to understand. But I think that, continuing to build and foster strong relationships with each other, to understand that, Charlotte is not going to be able to survive on its own. It needs all the rest of North Carolina to understand that the challenges in Charlotte affect North Carolina. So I look forward to the opportunity of taking that knowledge and experience to Raleigh, and I really can't wait for the opportunity.
All right, thank you, Mr. Autry. Mr. Madeline, your response.
Well, the delegation does well when the delegation understands what the commonalities are between our county and our municipalities and between the rest of the state. Again, North Carolina is a very rural state in large, and we've seen urban communities have challenges. Having a voice in the legislature that is able to penetrate some of that. And I think when our delegation is able to come together to find common ground with rural and suburban communities throughout our state, we'll be more successful. And I look forward to that opportunity.
All right, thank you. 30-second response. Next question. Does it concern you that North Carolina hit a 5-year high in teacher turnover this year and that enrollment in colleges and universities has significantly declined? What can be done to reverse this trend? Mr. Madeline, to you.
Well, it does concern me, but it shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone. There's been really a hatred and an onslaught to public education coming out of our legislature for the last 5+ years, and our state's never done a particularly good job funding education. And so when the marketplace it rejects what the state is willing to pay, teachers leave, and teachers don't. We got rid of the Teaching Fellows program, which was a terrific success. So it's no surprise to anybody that's paying attention. What we've got to do is get back into the business of fully funding the things that we know matter. It's not just about paying our teachers better. It's also about fully funding per pupil expenditures in the classroom so that they have the tools necessary to get their job done.
All right, thank you. Mr. Autry, your response.
Thank you. I'm very proud to say that I am a product of North Carolina public education. My children are products of public education in North Carolina, and I certainly hope to see my grandchildren thrive and move through the public education system in North Carolina. No, it should not be any surprise to anyone that North Carolina is losing teachers left and right. The Teaching Fellows program is a lost jewel that North Carolina had. We need to reinvest in that, but we need to reinvest in teachers and education, provide the teachers assistance, provide the classrooms with the tools that they need. That's the way we're going to be able to attract businesses and corporations to North Carolina that will bring employment, is to have a well-educated and prepared workforce.
All right, thank you. Our next question. There have been many instances of the legislature imposing its will regarding policies normally left to cities and counties, such as local redistricting, airport control, and others. Has the state gone too far? If so, What can be done about it? A 30-second response. Back to you, Mr. Autry.
Thank you for that question. Yes, in North Carolina, the state is the sovereign. We don't have home rule in cities and counties. We have Dillon's rule. So the state basically grants cities and municipalities the rights and privileges that they enjoy. So it's a real challenge with the urban centers versus rural centers that we've seen over the last few years. I would hope that we could work on a plan that would eliminate Dillon's rule in North Carolina and bring home rule to North Carolina. So municipalities like Charlotte could be able to be the masters of their own destiny.
All right, thank you. Mr. Matalon, your response.
Well, it's clear to me that as long as the Republicans are running the North Carolina legislature, they have made it clear that they're going to rule from Raleigh, and they're going to do what they want to do when it comes to municipalities and local governments. And that's unfortunate because, of course, it runs completely contrary to their stated ideology of small government and of pushing government as close to the people as possible. And so it would behoove all of us who are in Raleigh to remind our brothers and sisters on the Republican side that there is some intellectual honesty required when it's time to talk about allowing your municipalities to do their business for their people.
All right, thank you. In a 30-second response, what is your position on an independent redistricting commission? Do you think the present system is working? Mr. Matalon.
I do not think the present system works, and I would fully support an independent redistricting system. I think one similar to Indiana would be ideal in the state of North Carolina, where we allow professionals to design the districts and then allow the electeds to approve them up or down. Clearly, our state has been embroiled in lawsuit after lawsuit over the last 20-plus years over districts, both at the state level and at the federal level. It's clear it's not working. We've got the fox guarding the hen house. We've got Republicans and politicians in general in both parties picking their voters instead of their voters picking them, and that's unfortunate, and it needs to change.
All right, thank you. Mr. Autry, your response.
Thank you. The whole purpose of redistricting is so that voters can pick their representatives. The system that we have now is absolutely broken because the elected people pick their voters. I would turn redistricting over to cartographers and demographers and let them manage the redistricting. Districts need to be compact. Districts need to have values that they share with their other voters in that district. That's certainly not the situation we have now in Raleigh, and I would certainly hope that we would find a way to fix that.
All right, thank you. North Carolina's population is increasing and social needs are growing, but state spending as a part of the state economy is below a 45-year average. How can that be rectified? A 30-second response from you, Mr. Autry.
I think that you have to raise revenue. Revenue is the way that you're going to provide resources to handle the social needs of our cities and towns and our counties. North Carolina has always been at the forefront of taking care of its own citizens. And things like not expanding Medicaid in North Carolina and hurting about 400,000 of our own residents simply for political talking point is not the way that I remember North Carolina when I was growing up here. And I would certainly work to see those kinds of situations rectified.
All right, thank you. Mr. Matalon?
Well, isn't it interesting that we are getting ready to approve, hopefully, North Carolina Connect bonds for $500 million or more, and the state just gave $500 million or more back to the top wage earners in the state of North Carolina, and now we're having to borrow money essentially to do the business of the state. The Republicans in the legislature would like to starve the beast being government, and that's one of the ways that you do it. You cut revenues, you cut taxing ability, you cut the ability to tax the people that can afford to pay the most, and I would go to Raleigh and do everything I can to make sure that that is changed and that it's fair for the people that work in this state.
All right, thank you. Our next question, we're going to go back to Mr. Matalon first. 30-second response. The question is, benefits to help struggling working families, such as the Earned Income Tax Credit, food stamps, and child care subsidies have been cut or repealed. At the same time, many jobs do not pay enough to support a family. Would you support a living wage initiative? Why or why not?
I absolutely would, and here's why. When I was a child, my mother, we had food stamps. We were in Section 8 housing. I was on Medicaid as a child. When my mother was strong enough to reach out for help when my family needed it, the community was willing and strong enough to respond and provide that help. It's unconscionable that today someone like my mother would reach out for a child just like I was for the same kind of help and not be able to get it. That's why I'm running for the North Carolina legislature, because I want to give a voice to people just like I was when I was a child.
All right, thank you. Mr. Autry, your response.
Well, like I've said earlier, North Carolina has always been at the forefront of taking care of its own people. I myself had to live in public housing for a couple of years after my father was injured on the job. That was a non-union job, by the way, where he had no benefits. We had cheese out of a green box, meat out of a green can, and Christmas for a couple of years came from the Salvation Army. So I understand what it means to be struggling in North Carolina, but a living wage is a great way that we can improve the lives of North Carolinians, and the Earned Income Tax Credit is the best way and the best mechanism that poor people have for lifting themselves out of poverty, and I would absolutely go back and fight for that.
All right, thank you.
And Jeff, I'd like to just...
We have a challenge from Mr. Madelon.
I'd like to just add that North Carolina was the first state in more than 30 years to repeal an earned income tax credit. And I just want to make sure that people in our community understand just how egregious that earned income tax credit reversal was. No state in the nation has done that in more than 30 years, and it needs to be reestablished in the state of North Carolina as a first order of modernizing our tax system.
All right, thank you. And for the remaining questions, 30-second responses we're looking for. The next question is, North Carolina has different standards for drinking water from wells and for public water systems, with different departments issuing regulations. How should this safety issue be resolved before we become another Flint, Michigan? Mr. Madelon.
Well, our Department of Environmental Services at the state level has proven to not always be completely effective when it comes to managing those who would pollute our air and water in the state of North Carolina. And they're not going to be making any more air, and they're not going to be making any more dirt, and they're not going to be making any more water. So we've got to protect what we have, our rivers, our streams, and our estuaries, and the state of North Carolina is the entity through which that has to happen. It has to happen through a statutory and regulatory environment that hold those who pollute accountable, and I would support that as a legislator.
All right, thank you. Mr. Autry, your response?
Thank you. As the chair of the City Council Environment Committee, it has been my pleasure to understand completely some of the things that the Environment Department in the state has not been willing to do. For example, we wanted to hear 2 years ago about coal ash and the impact that would have as it's next to our drinking water here in the Charlotte region. But it was only because of understanding that the North Carolina General Assembly in 2006 preempted municipalities' authorities to do anything to regulate utilities operating in their area. So we definitely have a long way to go to protect our environment, because we're not going to survive very long without clean water, clean air to breathe.
All right, thank you. Our last and final question. State officials submitted a plan to the EPA on a new power plant emissions rules that many groups believe are designed to be obstructionist, since previous General Assemblies already had the state on a path toward compliance. Is the state acting in the interest of public health? We're looking for a 30-second response, and to you, Mr. Madelon.
Well, absolutely not. The state of North Carolina is going to have to make sure that our electrical and our industries that are producing electricity for our state are doing so in a sustainable way that are going to be good for our communities. We all need electricity. We all need sources to power our businesses and our homes, but we don't need to do it at the cost of our health, of our health and the health of our families and our children.
Thank you. Mr. Autry?
Certainly, we need to have the state to come forward and do more about looking into what the benefits are of renewable energy sources for the state. A 2006 study by NC State said that there was enough wind power off the coast of North Carolina to power the entire eastern seaboard. Why isn't that being looked into? And what are the benefits of job creation for this new energy? To continue to follow down the path of using fossil fuels for our energy resources just doesn't make any sense, because fossil fuels are a finite resource and they're not going to be with us forever. We're going to have to find those new solutions now, and we need them quickly.
All right, thank you. And now it is time for our 30-second closing statements. We'll begin with Mr. John Autry.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you very much. It has been my pleasure to serve the people of Eastern Charlotte for 10 years as an elected official, and for 15 years before that as a community organizer and a neighborhood activist. It is my pleasure to have the opportunity to go to Raleigh and represent you in the state legislature. We have lots of challenge with the state, and in a city like Charlotte, where 32% of the goods and services for North Carolina come from, we need a strong voice in the seats in Raleigh to make sure that Charlotte and all of North Carolina continues to thrive and grow.
Thank you, Mr. Autry. Mr. Billy Madeline, your closing statement.
It's been my pleasure to be a small business owner, a community activist, and to work in the civic areas, the Eastland Area Strategies team, the East-West Coalition, to work in a variety of ways to try to enhance the lives of the people of East Charlotte. It is not a good time to send the status quo, to send the ordinary folks to Raleigh. It's time to shake the place up and to send a message to Raleigh that it's not business as usual, and I think I'll fit that bill very well.
All right, thank you very much. Again, we want to say thanks to each of the candidates in the North Carolina House District 100 race for taking part in our debate. For information about the League of Women Voters Charlotte-Mecklenburg, go to www.goleaguego.org. We want to remind you to cast your vote. Early voting begins March 3rd, and the primary will be held Tuesday, March 15th. Thanks so much for watching, and be sure to vote.